Hello chaps, welcome, good morning, welcome to a lovely sunny Monday morning. It is a Monday, which means it's a no-show day for me, so I'm heading into town. I've got 2 minutes till my train leaves, so I'm in a bit of a rush, but I'm heading in to do some research. So in the last video I told you I was going to tell you all about the idea for the show. I also told you about a couple of the inspirations and reasons why someone might want to start making a solo show, and they included having a skill set, having a very particular set of skills. That was awful. That you might want to incorporate into your performance, and the other one was writing a show about a historical figure or someone from history, and my idea encompasses both of those. But to understand more about the idea, you have to understand a little bit more about me. As a child, I was very into magic, and I was a bit of a magic geek. As the product of an unspent youth, me and my friend James would practice magic tricks and share them with friends and family, and I managed to take this a step further. I took it on professionally when I grew up, started performing at parties and weddings, and made my own little show as part of a theatre festival, even entered a couple of competitions. But magic has always interested me. I let it go once I started drama school a little bit more, but it's always been there. The history of magic as well has always fascinated me, and when I was age 15, I came across this documentary about a guy called Jasper Maskelyne. What a name. He is actually the third generation in a very famous family of magicians called the Maskelynes. His father and grandfather, John Neville and Neville Maskelyne, were one of the founders of the Magic Circle, and they ran their own magic theatre in London called the Egyptian Hall. And my show is going to be about Jasper Maskelyne, particularly his wartime exploits, his apparent wartime exploits, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a sec. But I've arrived at my destination now to do my research. I'm heading to the library. Not just any library, the British Library. So, before we go in, I found a nice quiet corner for us to have a chat about Jasper Maskelyne. So, in 1939, when the war broke out, Jasper, so the story goes, went to the War Office and told them that although he was a little bit old to be a soldier on the front lines, he was 38 at the time, he wanted to offer his services as a magician to the battlefield. He thought that he could adapt his techniques for stage magic into effective deceptions on a large scale to trick the Germans. He wasn't taken seriously for a long time, but in the end someone gave him a chance and he joined a camouflage unit, did some training in England, and then was shipped out to Egypt, where he served as a major, created a crack squad of ragtag stagehands, prop makers, painters, carpenters, illustrators, what he called the Magic Gang, which was actually called the Camouflage Experimental Unit. Headed by Jasper, they created, imagined and built these huge battlefield deceptions that included things like moving Alexandria Harbour halfway down the coast so that the Germans would bomb the wrong place, literally using smoke and mirrors to make the Suez Canal, a very important shipping port, completely disappear from overhead German surveillance planes, disguising tanks as trucks and trucks as tanks so that the Germans wouldn't know where the attacks were coming from. And if you Google it, you'll find articles and documentaries and TV programs about Jasper, all saying that he is this unsung war hero that masterminded a lot of the great plans of the Desert War against Rommel's tanks in 1941 and 1942. And when I was 15, I watched this fairly cheaply made documentary on Channel 4 about Jasper Maskelyne. And I found this story absolutely fascinating. And they too had the viewpoint that Jasper was this unsung hero that never really got the credit he deserved. More should be known about him, and he deserved a lot more credit than he actually got in the war. And if you'll notice, I started this whole segment with the phrase, "so the story goes." Jasper, so the story goes. And the reason for that is that years later, when I finally decided to get cracking on making the show, I did a proper deep dive into finding more about it, and I found a website by a guy called Richard.stokes called masculinimagic.com, and I invite you to look at it as well. And this guy, Richard Stokes, had also, like me, stumbled across the story of Jasper, fell in love with it as well and wanted to find out more. But he took it a step further and said, hold on a minute, all of the accounts of this story, all of the TV documentaries, all of the magazine articles, all of the newspaper articles, all of it come from the same source. There is just one written account of Jasper's wartime efforts, and that's why I'm here at the British Library today, to have a look at that one source. So it's my first time at the British Library, so I've had to apply for a reader pass online before I arrived, and then when I arrived I had to get my reader pass, so I've got my pass. Here it is. The photo looks lovely, and now I've also had to request the item that I want to see, so that I can go to one of their reading rooms and read it. Alright, thank you. Well, that was a fascinating experience. The security in there is insane. There's all these rules about what you're allowed and what you're not allowed to bring in there. You're not allowed to bring any pens, you're not allowed to bring any food or drink, or not even water. They look after their stuff really well. You have to lock all your stuff up in lockers, and then you're only allowed a few certain things which you have to bring in a clear plastic bag. Anyway, it was a bit crazy, but the reason I'm here, so to carry on the story where we left off, this guy Richard Stokes had stumbled across Jasper's wartime achievements in an article in a magic magazine, and he loved it, but he, unlike other people, had decided to take a step back and say, let's examine this and let's see all the articles and all the TV documentaries, all the information that we have about Jasper's wartime effort. All this information came from one source, a book called Magic Top Secret. This book was written by Jasper Maskelyne. It is his own autobiography. It was published in 1949, and in this book he describes in great detail all of the amazing tricks and effects, these dummy tanks and these dazzle searchlights and these fake harbour towns and this fake bomb damage and this entire dummy armies designed to lure the Germans into the wrong place, and espionage materials, and it's so romantic and colourful and exciting, and a little too good to be true. Let's rewind now back to what I was saying earlier about Richard Stokes and his website. And so he undertook years and years of research, interviewing his only living son, trying to get in contact with colleagues of Jasper's, looking up as many war records as he could possibly get his hands on. And so we're now presented with two sides of the same story. The 15-year-old in me who found the documentary in the first place and was wowed and bowled over by the fact that magic was used in World War II to fool Hitler on a very base level, that's essentially what the show was going to be about, was very disappointed upon finding this research. And I also discovered that this autobiography of Jasper's was ghost written as well. It was ghost written. It wasn't even written by Jasper Maskelyne, a ghost writer who was known for embellishing facts and making things more colourful and romantic and more vivid and bright. But then a little bit later on, I was meeting up with a friend of mine who is a writer, and he's brilliant at seeing things from varying perspectives. And I told him that I was disappointed to find out that there's a lot of doubt and scepticism over whether or not Jasper's telling the truth or not. His first thought was, can you imagine being that ghost writer and having to write, if it is a load of lies, having to write a load of lies about World War II, like serious stuff? And this guy is claiming that he basically ended World War II 3 years early because of his amazing achievements and self-glorification. Imagine being that writer, having to perpetuate that story. And of course, that makes a much more personal story. That makes it a drama now. That makes it something with moral conflict. Not just theatrical tricks, not just bright colours and smoke and mirrors, but an actual morally conflicting story. We still don't know, we can't have any evidence to prove for certain that Jasper is telling a lie, but we have enough evidence to suggest that he's not being entirely truthful about what he achieved, whether he achieved it. And the other bit of historical information that you should know, 20 years after the war, 1963, 20th Century Fox over in Hollywood were all set to make a Hollywood film of this story. They too had picked up Jasper's autobiography, and they too thought it was an excellent story. And they interviewed Jasper. They sent people over to Kenya, where he then retired and was living, and recorded tapes of interviews and created some early drafts of scripts based on those interviews. And that film never materialized. It was just canned at the last minute. Don't know why. Maybe they knew something I didn't. So with that in mind, and with this new perspective, my thought is to combine everything together and create a show with two timelines. The protagonist of this show is not Jasper Maskelyne, but the protagonist is a junior scriptwriter with 20th Century Fox, and the play will be set in 1963 after everything's finished. Sorry, battery ran out, but it does mean that we're back home now, all plugged in, and I can finish this off nice and quickly. And so our main character starts off actually as an amateur magician and a huge fanatic of Jasper Maskelyne and all the Maskylynes. He is sent over to Kenya to interview Jasper in his retirement years to start work on this feature film. And as he does so, and as he starts to ask questions of Jasper, he is embodied with that doubt and skepticism and the whole grey area that we have today with our modern research. And it becomes a Never Meet Your Heroes style story. And the idea at the moment is that we jump from two timelines, from 2 points of view. One is, as Jasper told it in his autobiography, they're all singing, all dancing, all magic wartime stories. And then we will cut back to what is essentially our modern day, but 1963 story of our protagonist trying to discover whether his hero is the man he says he is, and whether he is deserving of his heroic status in this man's eyes. For me, the story is far more interesting when it brings up that question of trust, particularly where magic is concerned, because essentially that's all magic is a betrayal of trust, but a willing betrayal of trust. The type of people that Jasper would have entertained are the type of people who will willingly walk into a theatre, hand over their cash, full in the knowledge that the next 2 hours of their life is going to be given over to a man who is going to deceive them and is going to trick them and is going to fool them, yet they are going to love every minute of it, and it's going to be entertaining, and everyone will be better off by the end. So where does deception turn into deceit? Obviously we want it to be more about an emotional journey rather than cold hard facts, but cold hard facts is where we begin. And so for this show I'm using 3 main sources of research. The first is obviously Magic Top Secret. It's the source material of all of it. It's the very beginning of the story. The second being the other end of the spectrum, the more skeptical side of the spectrum, which is Richard Stokes' research online and all of his articles and essays that he's created. The third is actually one I haven't mentioned yet. It's a novelised version of Jasper's autobiography called The War Magician by David Fisher. David Fisher obviously found Jasper's story and took it hook, line and sinker, and has written a novel which venerates Jasper Maskelyne to the point of it being like a James Bond novel. It's even more heightened and romanticised than Jasper's autobiography itself. And the final thing I want to talk to you about today is what I mentioned at the very beginning about having that skill set that you want to bring to your performance. Now, I've always been very interested in magic being used in theatre. However, I've always been very disappointed when I've seen a lot of it. Most people's experience of magic in theatre is usually some kind of pantomime, some kind of magic show in which there's a fairy or a witch or some kind of wizard. At those times, what usually happens is that a production starts and then they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse the actual show, and then towards the end of rehearsals, a magician consultant comes in and adds a few tricks here and there into the plotline. This is the exact opposite of what I want to do with this show. I'm going to write the script. I may even find help to do so in writing the script, but my plan is to integrate magic and illusion and stage magic effects into the fabric of the narrative and use them as narrative tools, rather than just throwing in a load of tricks willy-nilly afterwards. Because the theatre as we know it has a lot of magic involved. It has entrances and exits and costume changes and scene changes, which could easily be altered to become appearances, disappearances, quick changes, transformations, levitations. Lots of these devices used to propel the story rather than just add a magical element to the show. And so ultimately, I want a show that's going to have multiple timelines, multiple uses of mixed media, some projection, some magic, some illusion. And at the heart of it all is just this really personal struggle from a guy who started off trusting someone implicitly and idolizing them as a hero, to looking behind the curtain and discovering that not everything is as it seems. Just like a magic trick. But unlike a magic trick, there's no willing suspension of disbelief when it comes to someone's personal trust. And so that's where we end our play, and that's where we end today's video. Well, there you have it. There is the very, very rough outline of the idea as it stands at the moment. It's obviously all bare bones at the moment. It might need a lot of tweaking. It might change entirely, but I'm very interested to find out what you think of the idea, whether you've heard of this story before, whether you knew anything about this subject before, if you would like to know anything else, if you have any questions that you want answered about this. It might spark something in me to get another perspective on what to write about. So thanks again for watching, and if you want to keep up to date on all the videos as they come out, subscribe, hit the bell button, and please do let me know your thoughts on the idea. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.